Three strange, true Appalachian trails. Horror stories that feel too real to be fiction. The Appalachian Mountains look familiar. Long ridgelines, dense trees, winding trails that feel steady under your boots. People hike them every day without incident. Families, solo hikers, weekend runners. That sense of normalcy is what makes these stories unsettling, because nothing about the Appalachians announces danger. They don't feel hostile. They feel old, worn, patient. Like a place that has learned how to watch without being noticed. There are sections of these mountains where sound behaves strangely, where footsteps seem to arrive before you do, where the woods fall so silent that even your breathing feels intrusive. Cell service fades without warning. Trails cross abandoned roads that no longer exist on modern maps. Cabins appear where no one claims ownership. And sometimes, people step into these places and come back changed. Sometimes they don't come back at all. What makes the Appalachian stories difficult to dismiss is how ordinary they begin. Clear weather, planned routes, experienced hikers who know what they're doing. No panic, no recklessness, just people moving through terrain they believe they understand. The shift never happens all at once. It starts with something small, a sound that does not match the environment, a smell that belongs nowhere near the forest. A trail marker that contradicts the map in your hand, a sense that the space around you has subtly rearranged itself. Search teams rarely find evidence of violence, no clear signs of struggle, no obvious explanation. In some cases, personal items turn up far from any logical route. In others, people reappear with gaps in memory they cannot explain. And in the worst cases, the trail simply stops telling the story altogether. These are not legends passed down for entertainment. They are accounts from hikers who believed the Appalachians were predictable, who trusted the trail, and who learned too late that some places do not behave the way they should. The mountains do not chase. They do not announce themselves. They wait for moments when no one else is watching. These are three strange, true hiking horror stories from the Appalachians that still do not have answers. He had hiked this section of the Appalachians more times than he could count. The trail sat just far enough from the nearest town to feel quiet, but not so remote that it felt dangerous. It was the kind of place experienced hikers favored when they wanted solitude without risk. Well-marked paths, gradual elevation changes, and familiar landmarks that made navigation almost automatic. He had grown up hiking these mountains with his father, and later returned to them alone whenever life felt crowded. This trail, in particular, had become a kind of anchor for him. The plan that morning was simple. A day hike, no overnight gear, no rushing. Just a steady walk out to a known overlook, lunch on the ridge, and then back before sunset. The weather cooperated perfectly. Clear sky, mild temperature, dry ground, the kind of conditions that make you lower your guard without realizing it. He parked at the small gravel lot just after sunrise, signed the trail register, and set off with an easy pace, breathing in the familiar scent of damp leaves and pine. Nothing felt off at first. The forest moved the way it always did. Wind brushed the canopy in slow waves. Birds called out intermittently, never lingering too long in one place. His boots followed the trail without effort, muscle memory guiding each step. He checked his map once out of habit, even though he already knew the route by heart. Everything lined up. The markers matched. The distance made sense. There was no reason to expect anything unusual. About an hour in, he passed a familiar junction where an older fire road crossed the trail. The road had been abandoned decades earlier, but the flattened ground and faint gravel still cut a clear line through the woods. He paused briefly, sipping water, and listening to the forest settle again after his footsteps passed. He remembers thinking how quiet it felt. Not silent, just restrained, as if the woods were holding something back. He continued forward without concern. As the trail climbed slightly, the trees thinned just enough to let in more light. Sun filtered through the canopy in long, slanted beams, illuminating dust motes and drifting pollen. It should have felt peaceful, and for a while it did. He kept a steady rhythm, occasionally glancing at his watch, mentally tracking his progress. Everything matched his expectations. Distance, time, effort. The trail behaved exactly as it always had. That familiarity mattered later, because when something finally felt wrong, it stood out immediately. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden noise, no visible threat. just a subtle inconsistency that caught his attention without triggering fear. He reached a bend where a trail marker should have stood. He had passed it dozens of times, a simple wooden post with faded paint pointing toward the overlook. But this time, it wasn't where it should have been. At first, he assumed he had misjudged the distance. He walked a few steps farther, then a few more. Still nothing. The trail itself continued clearly enough, but the absence of the marker nagged at him. He stopped, turned around, and scanned the trees. That was when he noticed the marker wasn't missing. It had been moved. The post stood several yards off the trail, partially hidden between two trees, angled in a way that didn't match the path at all. The arrow pointed into denser woods, away from any known route. He frowned, stepping closer to inspect it. The wood looked old, weathered, but the soil around its base was disturbed, darker and looser than the surrounding ground, as if it had been repositioned recently. That should have been the moment he turned back. Instead, he stood there longer than he meant to, listening. The forest felt quieter than before. Not dead, just subdued. He became aware of his own breathing again, of the way sound seemed to flatten rather than travel. He checked his map once more. According to it, there were no side trails in that direction. No spurs, no alternate routes. He told himself someone must have tampered with the marker as a prank or out of negligence. It wasn't unheard of. Still, the longer he looked at it, the more uncomfortable he felt. Not afraid, uneasy. The kind of feeling that doesn't come with a clear reason. He stepped back onto the trail and continued forward, deciding to keep moving rather than dwell on it. The woods swallowed the sound of his footsteps almost immediately. Within minutes, the misplaced marker was out of sight behind him. That was when he noticed something else, a faint sound drifting through the trees. Low, distant, continuous. It sounded like traffic. At first, he dismissed the sound as imagination. Trails twist in ways that carry noise unpredictably, especially in the mountains. He had heard distant highways echo through valleys before, carried miles by wind and elevation. But this felt different. The sound didn't swell or fade the way traffic usually does. It held a steady tone, low and constant, like tires moving over asphalt at a fixed distance. Too consistent. Too close. He stopped walking. The sound did not stop. He turned slowly, listening harder, trying to place it. The forest around him remained still. No cars passed nearby. No road should have been close enough to hear from this section of the trail. According to every map he had ever seen, the nearest highway sat miles away on the other side of several ridges. Yet the sound seemed to come from just beyond the trees, slightly downhill, as if a road were running parallel to the trail. He took a few steps forward. The sound shifted with him. Not louder, not quieter, just repositioned, staying at the same distance as though whatever produced it were moving in sync. That was the first moment unease crept into his chest. He stopped again, heart rate ticking up slightly, and focused on his breathing. He told himself it was an acoustic illusion, the kind hikers talk themselves into when they spend too long alone. Then he noticed the smell. It cut through the clean forest air abruptly. Oil, warm metal, the faint, unmistakable scent of machinery that did not belong among leaves and soil. It wasn't strong enough to burn the nose, but it lingered, coating the back of his throat. He turned slowly in a circle, trying to locate its source. The smell didn't drift or disperse. It seemed fixed in place, centered somewhere ahead of him. The trail bent gently to the right. As he rounded the curve, the forest changed in a way he couldn't immediately articulate. The trees thinned too quickly, opening into a narrow corridor that felt wrong for this elevation. The ground flattened out, the soil packed harder than it should have been. His boots no longer sank softly into dirt and leaves. The surface felt compressed, almost smoothed. The sound of traffic grew clearer. Individual vehicles became distinguishable, the low rush of tires, the occasional rise and fall of speed. He slowed, pulse quickening now, every sense alert. This was not possible. There should not have been a road here, and yet the evidence around him suggested otherwise. He pushed through a break in the trees and stepped into a clearing. What lay in front of him did not belong to the trail. A strip of asphalt cut through the forest, cracked and faded, but unmistakable. Yellow lines ghosted faintly beneath layers of dirt and moss. Weeds pushed up through fractures in the pavement. The road ran straight in both directions, vanishing into trees that closed in unnaturally close on either side. It looked abandoned, but it did not feel old. The air above the road shimmered faintly with heat, despite the cool shade. The smell of oil was stronger here, fresh, recent. He stood at the edge of the asphalt, staring, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he knew about this place. No maps showed a road here, no trail guides mentioned it, and yet the road looked worn, as if it had been used not long ago. He stepped onto the pavement. The sound of traffic stopped instantly. The forest fell into complete silence. No birds, no wind, no distant noise of any kind, just him, standing on a road that should not exist. That was when he noticed the footprints. They were not his. The footprints crossed the asphalt at a shallow angle, cutting from the tree line on one side to the trees on the other. They were spaced evenly, deliberate, and recent enough that the edges hadn't softened yet. Not animal tracks, not boot prints like his. They were narrower, lighter, as if whoever made them barely pressed their weight into the road. What unsettled him most was their direction. They didn't follow the road, they crossed it, as if the road itself was not the destination, only something to pass through. He crouched and held his hand just above one of the prints. The asphalt beneath it felt warm. Not sun-warmed. The shade here was thick, the canopy blocking most of the light. The warmth felt internal, rising slowly, like heat stored beneath the surface. He straightened up quickly, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt standing in the open. The silence pressed in harder now. It wasn't just quiet. It was as if sound itself had been reduced to a narrow range. He could hear his breathing, shallow and controlled, but it sounded wrong in his ears, flattened and dull. When he shifted his weight, the scrape of his boot against the pavement barely registered. The world felt padded, like he had stepped into a space not meant for normal acoustics. He looked back toward the trail. The opening he had come through no longer looked the same. The trees stood closer together now, the gap narrower, almost hesitant, as if the forest were reconsidering whether to let him leave. He took a step toward it and stopped. The smell of oil surged again, stronger, mixed with something else he couldn't identify. Not rot, not smoke. Something sharp and metallic that made his throat tighten. Behind him, the asphalt emitted a faint sound, a low vibration, not loud enough to hear clearly, but strong enough to feel through the soles of his boots. It reminded him of standing near a running engine, that subtle hum you feel before you hear anything at all. The road felt active, awake. He turned slowly, scanning the length of it. The trees on both sides leaned inward just enough to feel intentional. The road did not curve or dip. It ran perfectly straight, cutting the landscape in a way that felt artificial compared to the organic lines of the forest. There were no signs, no barriers, no debris that would explain how it ended up here, just asphalt, stretching into places he could not see. He checked his phone. No signal. That wasn't surprising. What was surprising was the compass app. The needle spun slowly, then stopped, pointing not north, not south, but directly down the road. He turned his body. The needle adjusted, correcting itself again to face the same direction. He rotated once more, faster this time. The needle lagged, then snapped back, unwavering. Something about that felt deliberate. He took a step backward toward the trail opening. The vibration under his boots intensified briefly, then steadied. The warmth rose again. He felt it through the soles of his shoes, creeping upward, uncomfortable now. The memory of the moved trail marker flashed in his mind, the arrow pointing into denser woods, away from known routes, toward places that did not line up on any map. He called out, testing the air. His voice sounded wrong. It did not echo. It did not travel. It dropped, swallowed almost immediately, as if the space around him absorbed sound on contact. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Then, from farther down the road, something answered. Not a voice, a sound, footsteps, slow, measured. Approaching from a distance he could not judge. They did not rush, they did not hesitate. Each step landed softly with the same light pressure as the prints he had seen. He leaned forward, straining to see, but the road ahead remained empty, swallowed by shadow and trees. The footsteps stopped. The vibration beneath his feet pulsed once, stronger than before. He realized then that the road was not abandoned. It was waiting. He did not run. Not at first. Some instinct told him that sudden movement would be a mistake, that whatever had produced those footsteps was already aware of him and did not need pursuit to close the distance. He stayed where he was, standing on the asphalt, every muscle locked, listening. The footsteps resumed. Closer now, still unhurried. Each step landed with the same light pressure, never scuffing, never scraping. The sound came from directly ahead, but the road remained empty. No silhouette, no movement between the trees, just the sound of someone approaching without allowing themselves to be seen. The vibration beneath his boots deepened, spreading up through his legs. The warmth rose with it, no longer subtle. The asphalt felt alive, humming softly, as if energy were moving just below the surface. The smell of oil thickened, sharp enough to sting his eyes. He backed away one step, then another, keeping his gaze fixed on the center of the road. That was when he noticed something else. The trees along the roadside were no longer still. They were leaning, not swaying with wind. There was no wind. They tilted inward, slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if drawn toward the asphalt. Branches creaked under their own weight. Leaves brushed together in a sound too deliberate to be natural. The road felt like the center of a shallow bowl, pulling the world toward it. The footsteps stopped again. This time, they were close enough that he should have been able to see whoever made them. He could not. The air in front of him distorted faintly, like heat rising off pavement in summer. The shimmer thickened, forming a vague outline where the road met shadow. Not a shape he could define, just an absence of clarity, as if his eyes refused to focus on that section of space. He raised his phone not to call for help but to use the camera. The screen lit up. For a brief second, the image looked normal. Then the picture warped. The road on the screen bent inward, curving unnaturally. The shimmer became more pronounced, pulling the image toward it. The phone vibrated sharply in his hand and shut off. The footsteps moved again. One step, then another. Right in front of him. The asphalt directly ahead sank slightly, no more than a fraction of an inch, but enough to be visible. A shallow impression formed, smooth and curved, as if something heavy had placed weight there without feet. Heat radiated upward in a sudden wave. He stumbled backward, heart hammering now, panic breaking through his restraint. The trail opening behind him looked wrong, smaller, narrower. The trees pressed closer together, branches overlapping where there had been space before. The familiar dirt path no longer looked welcoming. It looked like an exit that might close if he hesitated too long. Another impression formed on the asphalt, closer. The shimmer intensified, rippling outward. The sound of traffic returned briefly, louder than before, rushing past as if a highway were suddenly inches away. Then it cut out again, plunging the forest back into suffocating silence. He ran. The moment his boots left the asphalt, the vibration surged violently, like a growl felt through the ground rather than heard. He sprinted for the trail opening, lungs burning, branches clawing at his arms as he forced his way through. Behind him, the footsteps did not chase. They did not speed up. They followed, at the same measured pace. He burst back onto dirt, stumbling hard, catching himself on his hands. The ground here was cool, normal. The smell of oil vanished instantly. He scrambled up and ran without looking back, legs pumping on instinct alone. The forest sounds returned in fragments. Wind, birds, his own ragged breathing. He did not stop until the trail widened and the light changed, until the woods felt familiar again. Only then did he turn. The road was gone. No clearing, no asphalt. Just dense trees and undergrowth where the opening had been. The trail behind him looked untouched, as if no road had ever crossed it. But when he looked down at his boots, the soles were blackened, smeared with asphalt, still warm. He reported the incident the same day, not because he expected anyone to believe him, but because he could not explain what he had seen without saying it out loud. A park ranger met him at the trailhead and listened patiently as he described the misplaced marker, the sound of traffic, the road that should not exist. The ranger asked practical questions. Where exactly was the clearing? How far from the junction? How long had he been off the main trail? The questions were calm, professional, and completely inadequate for what he had experienced. They returned to the area together the next morning. The trail looked normal. The marker stood where it always had, upright and undisturbed. The forest floor showed no signs of recent disturbance, no clearing, no trace of asphalt. The ranger walked the path slowly, scanning the ground, checking his own map, frowning slightly as they passed the spot where the road should have been. According to every record, no service road had ever existed there. No construction, no reroute, nothing. The hiker insisted they keep looking. After nearly an hour, the ranger found something. Not the road, a personal item. The hiker's water bottle lay in a shallow ravine nearly 2 miles from where he had turned back. It was upright, balanced on damp soil where it should have rolled. The cap was still sealed. The outside was clean. No scratches, no dirt. When the ranger reached down to pick it up, he hesitated. The bottle was warm. The ranger did not comment on it. He simply placed it into an evidence bag and told the hiker they would file a report. Before leaving, the ranger quietly advised him not to hike that section again. No explanation, just a warning delivered without eye contact. In the weeks that followed, the hiker noticed changes he could not ignore. His boots, scrubbed repeatedly, still smelled faintly of oil when they warmed in the sun. His phone's compass began malfunctioning only when he entered wooded areas. And sometimes, late at night, he heard the sound of traffic outside his home, steady and distant, even though he lived far from any road. Search teams never closed the trail. But 6 months later, a new map replaced the old one at the trailhead. The overlook he had planned to visit that day was no longer listed. The junction where the marker had been moved now led nowhere on paper. Locals say that on quiet mornings, when the forest grows unnaturally still, you can sometimes hear cars passing deep in the woods. They say the sound does not come from any direction you can follow. It simply exists, just out of reach. And if you ever smell oil on a trail that should smell like leaves and soil, you should turn around immediately. Because some roads in the Appalachians are not meant to connect places. They are meant to take you somewhere else. They hadn't planned to stay overnight. That detail mattered later, when investigators tried to understand why they ended up inside the cabin at all. The hike was supposed to be simple. An afternoon loop through a familiar stretch of the Appalachian foothills, followed by an early dinner in the nearest town. The trailhead sat just off a narrow county road, the kind locals use without thinking twice. Nothing about the setting suggested isolation. Nothing about the weather suggested urgency. The group consisted of 3 people, 2 friends who had grown up hiking these mountains together, and 1 partner who had joined them more recently. All of them were experienced enough to know their limits. They carried headlamps, water, extra layers. They had checked the forecast, clear skies. Mild temperatures, no reason to rush, but no reason to linger either. They entered the trail shortly after noon. The forest felt open, almost welcoming, with sunlight filtering through thinning leaves and the smell of dry earth underfoot. Conversation came easily. They talked about work, about plans for the coming weeks, about how quiet the trail felt compared to busier parks closer to town. It was the kind of hike where time stretches without you noticing. Miles pass gently. Landmarks arrive right when you expect them. About 3 hours in, they reached a section of trail that dipped into a shallow hollow. The temperature dropped slightly there, the air cooler and damper. Sound changed too. Their voices didn't carry as far. Footsteps seemed to soften, absorbed by the ground. One of them joked that the place felt like a pocket where noise went to disappear. They laughed and kept moving. That was when they saw the cabin. It sat just off the trail, partially obscured by trees, its roofline blending into the shadows of the hollow, old but intact. Wooden walls darkened by age, windows unbroken, a small porch sagging but stable. It wasn't marked on their map, but none of them were surprised. Cabins like this dotted the Appalachians, remnants of old homesteads or logging operations abandoned decades earlier. They had passed similar structures on other hikes, without a second thought. They stopped briefly to look at it. The door was closed. No smoke from the chimney, no sound from inside. The place looked empty but not ruined. maintained just enough by time to avoid collapse. One of them remarked that it might be a good landmark for the return route. Another mentioned it could be a shelter if weather turned unexpectedly. They moved on. It wasn't until later, when the light began to shift, that the decision to return the same way felt less straightforward. The hollow seemed darker now, the trees closing in faster than before. Shadows stretched longer across the trail. The air grew heavier, carrying the faint smell of damp wood and old smoke. The cabin came back into view sooner than expected. That was when one of them checked the time and realized something was off. They should have been closer to the trailhead by now. Instead, the hollow felt deeper, the forest quieter, and the cabin stood exactly where it had been before, waiting. That was when the knock came from inside. The knock was soft, so soft that at first they weren't sure they had heard it at all. It came from inside the cabin, a single hollow sound that carried through the wood like a knuckle tapping lightly against a doorframe. One of them laughed reflexively, the kind of short, nervous reaction people have when something unexpected interrupts a calm moment. Someone joked that maybe the cabin wasn't as abandoned as it looked. They stood still and listened. Nothing followed. No footsteps, no voice. Just the faint creak of trees shifting in the hollow and the low hush of wind passing over the ridge above them. The silence felt heavier now, pressing down in a way that made the space around the cabin feel smaller than it should have been. They debated briefly whether to check the place. No one wanted to intrude, but the knock lingered in their minds. If someone was inside and needed help, walking away didn't feel right. They approached together, boots crunching softly on old leaves as they stepped onto the porch. The boards held their weight with a dull groan. The sound echoed too long, as if the cabin were amplifying it. The door was unlocked. That was the first thing that truly unsettled them. Not because it was unusual for an abandoned structure, but because it suggested recent human presence. The door opened easily, no resistance, no rusted hinges protesting the movement. The smell inside drifted out immediately. Cold smoke, damp fabric, something stale that had been trapped too long without fresh air. They stepped just inside the doorway, staying close together. The interior was sparse, a rough wooden table, a few chairs pushed against the wall. An old stove in the corner, cold to the touch. Dust coated most surfaces, but not evenly. Some areas looked disturbed, as if someone had brushed past recently. A chair sat slightly angled away from the table. A footprint marked the dust near the back wall. None of them spoke. They listened again for movement, for breathing, for any sign that someone else shared the space. The cabin responded with silence that felt deliberate, like a held breath. One of them cleared his throat quietly, the sound echoing in the small room longer than it should have. They backed out and closed the door gently. That should have been the end of it. They returned to the trail, quickening their pace, eager to leave the hollow behind. But after several minutes of walking, something felt wrong again. The trail didn't rise the way it had earlier. The ground stayed level. The air remained cool and damp. And when they rounded a bend, they knew well the cabin came back into view. It stood in the same place, same angle, same shadow falling across the porch. They stopped. Someone checked the map again. According to it, they should have passed the hollow already. The loop should have carried them upward toward the ridge. Instead, they were back where they started. No one could explain how. No one remembered turning around. That was when they heard the second knock. This time it wasn't from inside the cabin. It came from behind them. All three of them turned at once. The sound had come from the direction of the trail they had just walked. A dull, deliberate knock that echoed once and then vanished. There was no tree close enough for a branch to have struck another. No loose wood, no obvious source. Just the narrow stretch of trail behind them, empty and still. One of them called out, asking if anyone was there. The question felt foolish the moment it left his mouth. His voice sounded wrong in the hollow, flattened and shortened as if the air refused to carry it. The forest did not answer. Not with birds, not with insects, not even with wind. The silence pressed inward, making the space around them feel smaller, tighter. They started walking again, this time faster, no longer pretending the situation was normal. Boots hit the dirt with sharper rhythm. Breathing grew louder. The cabin stayed in their peripheral vision longer than it should have, as if the trail were curving subtly back toward it, no matter which direction they chose. When they finally risked another look over their shoulders, the porch was empty. Then, the knocking started again. 3 knocks this time, evenly spaced, not rushed, not aggressive, patient. It came from the cabin door. They stopped without meaning to. None of them wanted to turn around, but all of them did. The door was closed. The porch was empty, but the sound came again, closer now, as if the wood itself were producing it from the inside, a slow pressure against old timber. Someone whispered that they should leave immediately. Another whispered that if someone was inside, ignoring them felt wrong. Before they could decide, the door creaked open on its own. Just a few inches, no slam, no force. A careful movement, controlled, as if whoever pushed it understood exactly how much pressure the hinges would tolerate. The smell of cold smoke rolled out again, thicker than before, mixed with dampness and something faintly metallic. A voice came next. It spoke a name, not shouted, not whispered, spoken conversationally, like someone calling from another room. It was one of their names. The voice came from inside the cabin. The person whose name had been called went rigid. The others stared at him, waiting for him to deny it, to laugh it off. He didn't. His face had gone pale, eyes fixed on the dark gap between the door and the frame. He shook his head slowly, barely perceptible, as if afraid any sudden movement would invite something worse. He said the voice sounded familiar, not exactly like anyone he knew, but close enough to trigger recognition, close enough to feel wrong. The voice spoke again. This time it used his nickname, one only his family used. The air in the hollow shifted, a subtle pressure change that made their ears tighten. The forest around them remained silent, but the cabin felt occupied in a way that had nothing to do with physical presence. One of them felt a sudden, irrational certainty that if they stepped closer, the voice would step closer too. The person whose name was being called took one step toward the porch without realizing it. The others grabbed his arms immediately. He didn't resist. He looked confused, as if he had already forgotten deciding to move. His gaze never left the doorway. The door opened another inch, revealing only darkness beyond, no shape, no movement, just space that refused to reflect light. Then something else happened. Time slipped. None of them could later agree on how long they stood there. Seconds stretched unnaturally. The forest seemed to dim, as if the light were being slowly lowered. The cabin creaked softly, not under stress, but as if something inside shifted its weight. The voice stopped speaking. Instead, something moved inside the cabin. Slow, measured. The sound of footsteps on wood, pacing back and forth just beyond the doorway. Each step landed softly, never reaching the threshold, never revealing its source. One of them whispered that they should run. Another whispered that if they ran, whoever was inside would follow. The door opened fully. The interior of the cabin was darker than it should have been. Not shadowed, empty of light entirely. The air spilling out felt warmer now, carrying that same metallic edge they couldn't place. The footsteps stopped. The voice spoke again. This time, it was closer. Too close. The voice spoke his name again, but this time it didn't come from inside the cabin. It came from behind them. All three froze. No one turned immediately. Their bodies locked in place, every instinct screaming that whatever had spoken was close enough to feel, close enough that turning around would confirm something they were not ready to see. The cabin door remained open in front of them, dark and hollow, while the space behind them felt suddenly occupied. A slow breath brushed the air at their backs. Warm, too warm for the cooling evening. The metallic scent thickened instantly, flooding the hollow as if released deliberately. One of them gagged quietly, throat tightening. The pressure in the air increased, pushing against their chests, making it harder to inhale fully. It felt like the space around them had narrowed, compressing inward from every direction. The person whose name had been called began to shake. His eyes were unfocused now, staring past the cabin, past the trees, as if he were listening to something none of them could hear. He whispered that someone was standing right behind him, not touching him, just close enough that he could feel their presence like heat, radiating off skin. One of the others grabbed his jacket and yanked him backward. The movement broke something. The cabin door slammed shut with a force that rattled the windows. The sound cracked through the hollow, echoing unnaturally long before being swallowed by silence. At the same moment, the pressure vanished, releasing them all in a rush that made them stumble. They didn't think. They ran. Boots pounded the trail, branches tearing at their arms as they fled uphill, lungs burning, hearts hammering. None of them looked back. They didn't need to. They could feel the space behind them changing, the air shifting in waves as if something were moving without sound. The trail twisted sharply, climbing faster now, the ground rough and uneven. They nearly tripped over roots they didn't remember being there. The forest felt tighter, closer, the trees crowding the path as though trying to close it off. The silence followed them, absolute and suffocating. Then, without warning, the footsteps started. Not chasing, keeping pace, always just behind them. They could hear it clearly now, soft, deliberate steps landing in perfect rhythm with their own. No heavy breathing, no signs of exertion, just presence, measured, patient. They burst out of the hollow and onto higher ground where the light changed abruptly. The forest sounds returned in fragments. Wind, distant birds, their own gasping breaths. The footsteps stopped instantly. They slowed only when they reached a wider section of trail, collapsing against a tree, shaking uncontrollably. No one spoke for several seconds. When they finally did, their voices sounded thin, unfamiliar. They looked back toward the hollow. The cabin was gone. Not hidden. Gone. No roofline, no porch, no shadow where it should have been. Just trees and undergrowth closing over a space that had never held a structure at all. The trail behind them looked normal, undisturbed, as if they had imagined the entire encounter, except for one thing. The person whose name had been called was missing. His jacket lay on the trail where they had grabbed him, still warm. They searched for him until their voices were raw. They called his name again and again, moving cautiously back toward the hollow despite every instinct telling them not to. The trail refused to cooperate. Turns didn't line up with their memory. Distances felt wrong. What should have taken minutes stretched into something longer and heavier, as if the forest resisted being crossed in that direction. They found the place where the cabin had been. There was no sign it had ever existed, no foundation, no flattened earth, no remnants of wood or stone, just dense trees and leaf-covered ground that showed no disturbance beyond their own frantic footprints. One of them stood there shaking, staring at the space where the porch should have been, insisting they were in the right spot. He pointed out landmarks that no longer aligned. A crooked tree, a rock outcrop, a bend in the trail that didn't feel the same anymore. They called out again. The forest answered with silence that felt deliberate. When they finally reached cell service and contacted authorities, search teams arrived quickly. Rangers, volunteers, dogs. They scoured the area through the night and into the following days. The missing man's name echoed through the woods, carried farther by radios than by human voices. Nothing came back. No reply. No movement. No indication he had left the trail on his own. Dogs followed his scent for a short distance before stopping abruptly near the center of the hollow. The handlers later said it was as if the scent simply ended, not faded or dispersed. One moment it was strong. The next, it was gone entirely. The dogs refused to move forward after that, pulling back hard enough to snap a lead. Investigators found his wallet 2 days later, placed neatly against the base of a tree less than a mile from the trailhead. No dirt, no moisture, no signs it had been dropped or carried by animals. When an officer picked it up, he paused, confused. It was warm. Friends and family struggled to understand how he could vanish so completely. He knew the trail. He wasn't reckless. He had no reason to wander alone into the woods at night. The official report suggested he became disoriented and separated from the group. But the explanation didn't satisfy anyone who had been there. They all agreed on one thing. He hadn't wandered off. Something had called him. In the weeks that followed, hikers reported strange activity near the hollow, knocking sounds echoing faintly at dusk. The smell of cold smoke drifting through trees with no fire in sight. A voice occasionally carrying just far enough to sound familiar without being recognizable. Rangers dismissed the reports quietly, but one section of the trail was rerouted without explanation. The two friends never returned to that area. One of them admitted later that sometimes when the house is quiet at night, he hears knocking. 3 soft taps, evenly spaced, always from the wrong side of the room. When he opens the door, there is nothing there, but the air feels warm, and for just a moment, the silence feels too complete. The missing man was never found. The cabin does not appear on any map, and the hollow where it stood feels colder now, as if something hollowed it out from the inside. He wasn't supposed to be out there that late. That was the first thing he told himself when he later tried to explain why he ignored the feeling in his chest. The hike had started in the late afternoon, timed carefully so he could be back at his car before dark. He had done this ridge trail dozens of times, sometimes at sunrise, sometimes just before sunset. It was exposed in places, offering long views across the valleys, but close enough to a service road that it never felt truly remote. That balance was why he liked it. Solitude, without isolation. He parked along the gravel turnout just as the sun dipped lower behind the mountains. The air was warm for the season, thick with the smell of dry leaves and dust. Cicadas buzzed intermittently, then fell quiet again. He adjusted his pack, checked his phone for signal out of habit, and started up the trail at an easy pace. No rush, no tension, just another familiar walk to clear his head after a long week. The ridge trail climbed gradually, winding along the spine of the mountain. To his left, the land dropped away sharply into dense forest. To his right, the slope rose, rocky and uneven. The trail itself was narrow but well-defined, packed dirt with occasional stones. Every so often, gaps in the trees opened to reveal distant hills, fading into blue-gray layers. The light shifted constantly as clouds passed overhead, shadows sliding across the ground in slow waves. He walked for nearly an hour without noticing anything unusual. His breathing settled into a steady rhythm. His thoughts drifted. The world felt contained and predictable. He checked the time and realized he had lingered longer than planned. Sunset was approaching faster than he liked, but he wasn't worried. He knew exactly how long it would take to get back. That was when he noticed someone ahead of him on the trail. At first, it barely registered, just a dark figure standing near a bend where the ridge narrowed. He assumed it was another hiker, maybe someone stopping to take in the view. It wasn't uncommon to cross paths up here, especially near dusk. He slowed slightly, more out of courtesy than caution. The figure did not move. He continued forward, closing the distance. The trail ahead remained quiet. No sound of footsteps, no shifting weight. The person stood perfectly still, facing away from him, outlined faintly against the lighter sky beyond the ridge. Something about the posture felt wrong, not threatening, just rigid, as if they were waiting rather than resting. He called out a casual greeting. The figure did not respond. He told himself the wind might have carried his voice away, though there was barely any wind at all. He took a few more steps forward, eyes fixed on the person ahead. The distance between them did not seem to shrink the way it should have. The figure remained just far enough away to avoid detail. No clothing features stood out, no movement of arms or head. Then the figure stepped off the trail, not down the slope, not up into the rocks, sideways, directly into the trees. There was no sound of brush breaking, no stumble, no hesitation. One moment the figure stood on the path. The next, it was gone, absorbed by the forest without disturbing a single branch. He stopped walking. The space where the figure had been felt empty in a way that made his skin prickle. He waited, listening for movement, for footsteps circling back onto the trail. Nothing came. The forest held its breath. Even the insects seemed to have paused. He told himself it was just another hiker taking a shortcut or stepping aside. Still, he didn't like how clean the movement had been. Too smooth, too quiet. He checked the time again. He had lost more daylight than he realized. As he started forward once more, a strange thought crept in, uninvited and persistent. He had the unsettling sense that someone was now walking behind him. He didn't turn around immediately. That instinct, the one that tells you not to look too quickly, held him in place for several steps. He kept walking, listening instead. The ridge trail had always carried sound clearly. Footsteps echoed faintly. Loose gravel shifted under boots. But now, The air behind him felt dense, as if it absorbed noise before it could travel. Then he heard it. A step, not loud, not careless. A careful placement of weight against dirt and stone. He stopped. The step stopped with him. His heart rate climbed, slow at first, then faster. He waited, counting his breaths, hoping the sound had been his own echo, delayed somehow by the slope. After a few seconds, he convinced himself that was all it had been. The mind plays tricks when daylight fades. He took another step forward. So did the sound, same distance, same rhythm, not gaining, not falling behind. Perfectly matched. He glanced over his shoulder. The trail behind him was empty. It stretched back along the ridge in a gentle curve, disappearing behind trees and rock outcrops. No movement, no figure, no sign that anyone else was there. Yet the sensation remained, sharp and undeniable, the feeling of being tracked without being pursued. He picked up his pace. The footsteps did not. They remained exactly where they had been, as if whatever followed him did not need to hurry. The sound came again, softer now, more felt than heard, a pressure against the air rather than a noise within it. His skin tightened across his shoulders. The hair at the back of his neck lifted. He told himself to stay calm. Panic would only make things worse. He reminded himself that this trail stayed close to civilization, that there were houses and roads not far away, that whatever he was experiencing had a rational explanation. Then the smell reached him. Dry at first, subtle, like heated dust or sun-warmed stone. It grew stronger with each step, threading through the cool evening air until it settled in his throat. It didn't belong to the forest. It was the kind of smell you noticed near old machinery or exposed wiring. Sharp, metallic, unnatural. He stopped again. This time the footsteps did not stop. They took one more step, closer. He turned fully now, heart hammering hard enough to feel in his ears. The trail behind him remained empty, but the space felt occupied. The light had changed while he wasn't looking. Shadows stretched farther across the path, merging into darker shapes that seemed to cling to the ground. The ridge no longer felt open. It felt narrow, constrained, as though the edges had moved inward. His breathing sounded too loud, too intrusive. He called out again, louder this time, demanding to know who was there. His voice fell flat, swallowed before it reached the trees. No answer came back. Instead, something shifted off the trail. Branches moved without snapping. Leaves brushed together without falling. A shape passed through the undergrowth parallel to him, keeping pace just beyond the edge of visibility. He could sense it more than see it, like pressure building beside him. He started walking again, slower now, forcing himself not to run. The shape moved with him, always just off to the side, always hidden. The trail ahead dipped sharply, leading toward a narrow section of ridge he knew well. Beyond it, the path widened again and curved toward the access road. Relief sparked briefly in his chest. If he could just reach that section, the space would open up. The feeling of being boxed in would ease. As he approached the dip, the smell intensified. The metallic edge burned faintly in his sinuses. The air felt warmer here, heavier, as if it resisted his movement. The footsteps behind him resumed, clear now, no longer trying to hide. One step for every step he took. When he reached the narrowest part of the ridge, the footsteps stopped. So did the movement beside him. The forest went completely still. And that was when he realized something far worse. There were no sounds coming from the trail ahead either. The silence ahead of him felt deliberate. Not the natural quiet of evening settling in, but a clean absence of sound, like someone had drawn a boundary and muted everything beyond it. He stood at the narrow section of the ridge, one foot slightly forward, afraid that committing his weight would trigger something irreversible. The air pressed against his chest, warm and dense, making each breath feel heavier than the last. He listened carefully. Nothing moved in front of him. Nothing moved behind him. The forest felt suspended, caught between moments. Even the cicadas had stopped. He became painfully aware of his own body, the faint creak of his pack straps, the soft thud of his pulse in his ears. The smell of metal hung thicker now, sharp enough to taste, clinging to the back of his tongue. He took one cautious step forward. The ground beneath his boot felt wrong, Not unstable, not soft, too firm. The dirt gave less than it should have, as if something solid lay just beneath the surface. He shifted his weight back instinctively, heart jumping. When he looked down, the soil appeared normal, packed and dusty, indistinguishable from the rest of the trail. But the sensation lingered, an echo in his nerves telling him the ground there did not behave like ground. A sound came from the trees to his left. Not footsteps this time. Breathing, slow, controlled. Close enough that it should have stirred leaves or bent branches, but nothing moved. The breath felt directional, aimed toward him rather than drifting naturally. He turned his head slowly, refusing to look too quickly, knowing that whatever was there did not want to be seen all at once. The breathing stopped. Immediately behind him, the smell intensified, flooding the narrow ridge. The warmth surged, radiating outward, as if something large had stepped into his personal space without touching him. His muscles locked, panic spiking hard now, every instinct screaming at him to run, to break whatever invisible line he had crossed. He spun around. The trail behind him stretched back empty and ordinary, but the shadows clung to it unnaturally, pooling in places where the light should have reached. The sense of presence was overwhelming now, a pressure rather than a figure, as if something occupied space without needing a shape. Then he heard it, a footstep, not on the trail, on the ridge itself. The sound came from somewhere above the ground, landing with a dull thud that vibrated faintly through the stone beneath his feet. He staggered back, nearly losing his balance, arms flailing as he fought to stay upright on the narrow path. His heart pounded violently, breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The footstep came again. Closer. This time, the air shimmered faintly, warping the space beside him. The trees behind that distortion bent inward, their outlines stretching unnaturally, as if pulled toward a center he could not see. The smell of metal burned his nose, his vision narrowed, edges darkening. He ran. The moment he broke into a sprint, the pressure surged behind him, not chasing, not rushing, simply advancing at the same measured pace as before. He could feel it now, heavy and close, matching his speed without effort. The trail twisted sharply, dropping steeply toward the wider section he had been aiming for earlier. He nearly slipped, boots skidding on loose gravel as adrenaline carried him forward. The forest erupted with sound all at once. Cicadas screamed back to life. Wind tore through the canopy. His own footsteps thundered in his ears. Behind him, the presence remained silent, its movement inferred only by the way the air shifted against his back. He burst out of the narrow ridge into the wider clearing, stumbling hard, hands scraping against rock as he caught himself. He spun around, gasping, expecting to see something standing there at last. There was nothing, no figure, no movement, no disturbance. The trail behind him looked completely normal, but the smell of metal still clung to the air, and his heart refused to slow. He stayed crouched for several seconds, bracing himself against the rock, waiting for the sound of footsteps to return. They didn't. The clearing felt wrong in a different way now, too open, too exposed, like stepping into the center of a stage after being hunted in the wings. The smell lingered, faint but unmistakable, threading through the air even as the forest noise resumed around him. He stood slowly, scanning every angle. The ridge behind him looked harmless again, just dirt and stone and trees leaning into twilight. But his body didn't believe it. His muscles remained tight, ready to move without instruction. He took a step forward toward the access road he knew lay just ahead. A shadow moved, not across the ground, across the air. It passed beside him at chest height, fast enough that he almost missed it, but slow enough that his eyes caught the distortion. The space bent slightly, as if something tall and narrow had crossed between him and the trees without blocking light, the way a solid body should. His breath hitched. He turned sharply, heart slamming against his ribs. Nothing stood there. The pressure returned instantly, heavier than before, pressing down on his shoulders, forcing him to hunch as if walking against a strong wind that didn't touch the trees. The smell surged again, hot and metallic, filling his lungs. His ears rang, a low tone that drowned out the forest sounds one by one until only that vibration remained. Then he heard his own footsteps, not the ones he was making. A second set, landing half a beat after his own, slightly offset, as if mirroring him imperfectly. He froze. The footsteps continued for 2 more steps before stopping. He stood rigid, counting his breaths, afraid that even inhaling too loudly would draw whatever followed him closer. A whisper brushed past his ear. Not words. Just the sound of breath moving through a space shaped like a mouth. His vision narrowed sharply, black creeping in at the edges. He staggered forward, breaking into a run without thinking. The trail ahead blurred as adrenaline took over. He could hear nothing now except his own heartbeat and the faint echo of movement just behind him, never quite touching, never falling back. The access road came into view suddenly, a pale strip cutting through the trees. Relief flared so hard it hurt. He pushed himself harder, lungs burning, legs trembling as he burst out of the woods and onto gravel. The moment his foot hit the road, everything stopped. The pressure vanished. The ringing in his ears cut off mid-tone. The smell disappeared, as if switched off. He stumbled forward another step, nearly collapsing, then straightened and spun around. The trail entrance stood empty behind him. No shadows moved. No distortion lingered. The trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, ordinary and indifferent. The ridge looked no different than it ever had. The forest noise carried normally again. He stood there shaking, trying to convince himself it was over. Then he looked down. The dust on the road beneath his boots showed a second set of impressions beside his own, longer, deeper, and perfectly matched to his stride. He stared at the footprints until his eyes began to blur. They ran alongside his own for several steps, perfectly parallel, then stopped abruptly at the edge of the road. There were no signs of a turn. No indication that whatever had made them had stepped away or retreated back into the woods. They simply ended, as if the ground beyond that point no longer registered weight. He backed away slowly, heart still racing, refusing to turn his back on the trail entrance. The smell was gone now. The air felt normal again. Too normal. The ridge behind him looked harmless in the fading light, trees silhouetted against the darkening sky. If he hadn't felt the pressure, heard the breathing, seen the distortion, he could have convinced himself none of it had happened. He reached his car and locked the doors before his hands stopped shaking. He sat there for a long time without starting the engine, staring through the windshield at the dark line of trees bordering the access road. The footprints in the dust were already fading as a breeze picked up, blurring the edges, erasing the evidence. He reported the encounter the next day. Rangers listened, asked questions, took notes. They told him hikers sometimes experience sensory distortions near dusk, especially when alone. Fatigue, stress, imagination. None of their explanations accounted for the second set of footprints. None of them addressed why his description of the smell matched reports from other hikers in nearby sections of the ridge. Weeks passed. He avoided the trail entirely. Then one evening, driving home from work, he heard something that made his chest tighten. A low, steady sound drifting through his open window. Traffic, distant, constant, out of place. He slowed, scanning the road ahead. There were no cars nearby, no highway close enough to explain it. The sound remained at the same distance no matter how fast or slow he drove. When he reached home, the sound stopped. Later that night, lying awake in bed, he became aware of another presence. Not a shape, not a sound, just a pressure in the room, subtle and patient. The air felt warmer near the foot of the bed. He kept his eyes closed, breathing shallowly, telling himself not to move. In the morning, his shoes sat by the door where he had left them. The soles were dusted with fine gravel, the same kind found along the access road. He never returned to that ridge. He stopped hiking alone altogether. But sometimes, when he walks quiet streets at night, he hears footsteps that match his own just a fraction of a second too late. When he stops, they stop. When he turns around, the street is empty. The Appalachian trails remain open. People still hike them every day, and most of them return without incident. But the mountains remember every step, and sometimes they follow one back. The Appalachian Mountains don't announce themselves as dangerous. They don't warn you with signs or sudden violence. They let you walk in believing everything is normal. The trails stay visible, the air stays calm, the forest looks the way it always has. And that is what makes these stories linger, because nothing about them feels exaggerated, nothing feels fictional. In each of these cases, the people involved did everything right. They planned their hikes, they knew the terrain. They trusted the trail, and still something shifted. A road that should not exist, a cabin that appeared and vanished, footsteps that followed without ever revealing their source. No explanations fit cleanly, no answers bring comfort. Search teams look for evidence that makes sense. Maps get updated, reports are filed, official explanations are written, but the mountains remain unchanged, holding on to the parts of these stories that refuse to be explained away. Sounds that come from nowhere, places that behave incorrectly, presences that never show themselves but never leave either. If there is a pattern here, it isn't monsters or legends, it's familiarity. These things happen on trails people trust, in places they've walked before, at moments when fear feels unnecessary. The Appalachians don't need you to be reckless, they only need you to assume you understand them. So if you hike these mountains, pay attention to the small things. A smell that doesn't belong, a sound that follows too closely, a path that feels slightly wrong, because the most unsettling part of these stories isn't what people saw, it's what they couldn't explain. And whatever caused it is still out there, moving quietly, waiting for the next set of footsteps to sound familiar enough to follow.